Hey there, welcome to the Reinsurance Podcast, the place where we dive into all things reinsurance, the coolest part of insurance. We're your hosts, Jared and Ben, a couple of ex-practitioners who loved the industry so much we founded Supercede to tackle some of its biggest headaches. And we're here to share our insights and stories with expert guests as we uncover what's really going on in the industry.
Welcome everybody to today's episode. Delighted to have with us Simone Krummaker, the Associate Professor of Insurance from Bayes Business School. Welcome, Simone. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Delighted to have you here because obviously many of our listeners actually work in reinsurance, but not many of them study the sector as a whole and try and understand what goes on within it. But obviously you've got a very different perspective from which to observe its many mysterious goings on. So how did you get started in that journey to begin with, the study of insurance and reinsurance?
Yeah, that only came later as well. I didn't start with studying insurance as well. I started right in the industry with what you typically do in Germany when you don't go to university, you do an apprenticeship.
Nice.
And that was with an insurance company in Hanover in the early 1990s.
Yeah, very cool. And then the journey from there towards academia, were you drawn towards academia more fully, or was that something that sort of happened by chance?
A bit of both. I think first I had to figure out that I liked insurance because I didn't pick insurance or the insurance company as such. It was one of the best paid and probably most friendliest kind of company that seemed to be a good place to do not an internship, an apprenticeship with. And I somewhat got stuck, but also I was lucky that the first department that I was in dealt with technical and transport insurance around one of the largest fairs that did happen at the time in Hanover. So there were pretty interesting claims and proposals coming in.
Yeah.
And I was also lucky to sit opposite of a loss adjuster.
Okay.
So I got all the interesting stuff right in my first 3 months on my desk, or I could just read through the files and got hooked in some way. And this idea of more corporate insurance or commercial insurance seemed to got stuck with me ever since.
I think this is the moment a lot of people have in the career, is that thing that unlocks it, going, oh, this is actually super interesting. Like, everyone sort of knows cars and homes. You tuck into these sorts of areas and it begins to sort of expose in many ways like the complexity of how this industry operates. So that's super cool.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you might have that experience yourself when, particularly after you meet your schoolmates again after a couple of months or years, and then they say, oh, what do you do? And then you say, I work in insurance. And they either ask you, oh, I need a car insurance, or they say, what's the weather like tomorrow? Kind of either this or that. And you think, I don't do both either. And I mean, it took me a while to find a take on how to tell people that insurance can be interesting. I take some of these little successes over time to actually have intrigued people to think about insurance.
Yeah, definitely. And I know it's something we get very nerdy about as a subject, and a lot of our listeners do. I hope nerdy is a good term. Positivity.
Nerds, of course.
Yes.
Leaning into it.
But it's something actually I've always wanted to do at some point. So maybe one day I'll follow in your footsteps here. But what gave you the first chance, I guess, to look at insurance, not just as a job, but actually as a bit more of a study area?
Yes. So after I finished my apprenticeship, I did work as an underwriter for another year. I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to stick or not, so I took the opportunity to travel around kind of with the insurance company that I was with at the time, but figured out quite quickly I think I would get bored, even though the business as such is interesting, but maybe not underwriting kind of agricultural policies and stuff like that. So along with kind of a good handful of former co-apprentices, we all went to study business and economics at the University of Hanover. And the insurance company quickly figured out that they might get kind of losing out on a resource that they have nurtured for 2 or 3 years and paid kind of a lot of money for it. So they created a little group of former apprentices who went on to study, worked part-time, got quite interesting projects. So we had our little own, let's say, graduate team over the course of our studies. And then we all went back to work for them after we graduated. Yeah. We all took insurance also as one of our main focus at university. which was also a nice coincidence, I suppose, because one of the largest insurance departments at a German-speaking university. And I then started to work in HR controlling. So not in a core insurance function, but as you know, that kind of HR or human resource is the biggest, probably workable resource in an insurance company.
Indeed.
So I was involved in nearly all strategic projects.
Yep.
But I also never got or lost touch with my supervisors at uni.
Yeah.
And I figured out I liked research. So once kind of an opportunity arose to go back and do a doctorate and work more on the research side of it, I took it.
Very, very cool.
Very interesting.
And did you keep a dialogue with your various insurance industry contacts?
Absolutely. That is at the core of what I do ever since. So I think my expertise really lies in getting the conversation between academia and practice flowing. And I was very lucky that when I moved over, let's say on the theoretical side of insurance, that at that time the University of Hanover, together with two other universities, the state of Lower Saxony and the insurance industry in Hanover, were creating a public-private partnership which had as a core function the knowledge transfer between industry and academia. So that is what I did ever since.
Yeah. And what does like the course sort of work look like, if like the very high level sort of set of topics you'll cover in someone studying insurance at Bayes?
Yes, so studying here at Bayes Business School for a master's in insurance and risk management, you would be exposed, let's say, to the fundamental theories. Of course, we would also look to connect with neighboring disciplines into finance a little bit, also core risk management. We would take you through the core business functions as well as strategy of an insurance company. And then you would also have the opportunity to either go deeper or wider with choosing from a set of electives, for example, going into reinsurance or marine or claims management, or what else do we have? Alternative risk transfer, so things like that.
Very interesting. And is there an area that you sort of lean into most, that you're like, this is my favorite section or my favorite area to teach into?
You don't have to say reinsurance just because you're on the reinsurance podcast.
Yeah, but funnily, it goes in that direction, because since from the start, what I said at the beginning, kind of commercial insurance is kind of at the heart of my passion. That, of course, flows into reinsurance as well. I absolutely enjoy teaching my reinsurance elective, which is just around to start end of May.
Yeah.
And also in my own research, I cover most kind of the questions of what role insurance plays in risk management, financial risk management, enterprise risk management.
Yeah.
Nice. And just to give us an idea of the research world of insurance, what general themes are there within topics when it comes to the corpus of written, papers and so on? What are people studying in depth? Is it data that they're looking at? Is it behavior? Is it industry, market? What sort of themes come out in the written research?
Okay, how long do we have? That's kind of an impossible question to answer, because of course you will find everything, and as you know, insurance is an inherently interdisciplinary sector or subject or industry. You'll find aspects relevant to insurance everywhere, whether that's economics, whether this is policy, whether that's regulation, whether that's finance, whether that is organization theory, but also then kind of things that are more tailored or more interesting for insurance. That's really hard to say. Yeah. Probably everything and nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're all over the place, I think.
Do you get people from other disciplines or other course routes contacting your course to try and team up on things? Like if you're doing pure economics, let's say, and like, insurance seems like an interesting case study, or...
Yeah, we're getting better with this, I think, because risk is relevant everywhere. So, for example, my supply chain colleagues and operations research colleagues, of course, have figured out that we do things about risk management, supply chain risk and supply chain risk management. So that seems to be a natural fit. Yeah. Or the crisis in the Red Sea might be something interesting to look at from a shipping, trade and finance point, as well as for us, of course, from an insurance point of view. And you can probably tell stories about reinsurance in that area.
Absolutely.
Quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, in reinsurance, I've seen colleagues join our industry from all manner of sectors, but you also see ones where people have studied like weather and atmospheric and oceanic sciences coming through to go into cat modeling sort of spaces, and people who've studied geology going into those sort of areas too. So again, like you bumping into the understanding of how the planet moves and the impact that will have on these markets. So it is so interconnected, which makes it a fascinating sort of hub.
Along with the occasional music graduate.
The occasional music graduate as well, who's bored with just being a classical musician and wants to do reinsurance instead.
Well, I think that is also what makes the insurance sector interesting, is that it's also so diverse in terms of what people work there, where they're coming from, what they've learned, what they bring in, but also it's necessary, right? Because insurance has to do with everyday life. Yeah. So we need people from everywhere actually that will enable insurance to make judgment about risks, right? And to evaluate them and to make them somewhat workable.
Yeah. I think it'd be an interesting course if it was like a required like 101 course for people to get an understanding, because I think as a young, especially in a university program like the United States, which has a broad breadth of sort of requirements, because it does expose like everything else you'd look at, you'd have this lens of all of this also connects and touches insurance to some degree, whether that's human behavior and how that drives casualty, economics and business and all of these things. So I think it'd be a really interesting 101 course. Is that something that is driven through at the business school? You sort of select insurance, you sort of go down that path. Is that the program?
Yes, so we do teach insurance at master's level. So most of the students that choose this have an idea of that they want to work in the industry or have already worked in the industry already. I call them my mini MBAs actually, because many of them have a good chunk of career already, and they want to kind of further their career or being able to kind of build alternatives and make choices about where they want to go in the future. But that also means that I have people from all kinds of backgrounds also in the classroom. So from, let's say, American history to chemistry to someone who might have an actuarial degree already. And we cater really for kind of the business of insurance rather than maybe the statistical or actuarial underpinnings, which we also have, but that's a different degree.
Yeah.
Really enable future leaders or subject experts for the industry to either drive on strategy or innovation or business development, product development, so these areas.
And do you see much in the way of public and private partnerships taking place between specific carriers or insurance companies? How do you orchestrate an industry that would like talent to emerge or to retrain or to gain more knowledge and then to go back into the industry, with the fact that presumably there's no guarantee that they'll come back to their company? Is there a way that you can work with them?
Yes, I mean, there are lots of ways we could work with the industry or we collaborate. I mean, we would be very welcoming where employers would like to talk to us and find ways. We have a couple of scholarships that students can pick up. Also on other programs, we do have employers or governments or certain regulators that do send their employees over. We have a big, I think there's a big reinsurer in South Korea who regularly encourages their employees to take our program. There are quite lots of routes into kind of making this feasible. It can also be studied part-time. And it also gets a lot of exemptions towards the advanced qualifications with the Chartered Insurance Institute.
Very true. Yeah.
A topic near and dear to Ben's heart.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's another connection maybe between kind of higher education and the practice, this is closely linked.
Indeed.
Do you see, is there a specific area of study that is sort of the course that's always sort of oversubscribes or sells out or gets overbooked, that it's like the most popular course that you tend to see each year?
That's difficult to say because at business schools we recruit much internationally as well, and that's always also a bit of a play ball of the geopolitical and kind of home political developments. At the moment, there seems to be a draw away from more general business education, let's say general management or marketing or finance seem to be getting a little bit of less of attention towards more specific courses, but that might change again. It also depends on which industries might do well. Then usually we see less demand because salaries might increase and job opportunities might be good, and particularly in the master's sector, then you can easily postpone going on your master's degree later after you've built your professional profile a bit. There can be a bit of both students or applicants who seem to target more specific areas, like insurance, for example, seem to be more determined to do a certain program and to go to certain universities where there is much more choice in more general programs like management or finance, which seem to be kind of interchangeable across the sector.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's something I wanted to ask you, kind of related to this. You've been on both sides, having worked in the profession and seen the practice, and you've also now worked on, I guess, the more theoretical side. So we've got this mix of theory and practice. How do the two interact, especially in a world that's post-COVID, where you haven't necessarily always got that same sit next to the person who's further ahead than you? The apprenticeship in some ways is challenged in the modern era. I think the CII actually did a paper on this. Does the remote working world threaten this way of learning? How does theory and that side of things come into play when that practice angle has changed as well?
Yeah, I think there are probably several levels to that question. One of which is, how do we work and how do we interact in the workplace, which I think some of the developments that we see to more flexibility, to allow and integrate working from home seems something that sometimes now Generation Z or snowflakes or whatever label you might put on them might be something that maybe in my generation we would have found nice to have as well, but never asked, right? It wasn't just a thing. So, as an academic, I've always taken the liberty to work from home when I didn't have anything kind of to do at university or to teach or meetings. So that is something I think has probably been normalized a little bit. Yeah. But as we know, we are still social animals, right? And lots of creativity and the things that happen when you just walk somewhere or you meet in the lift or in the staircase or you go into a meeting before it actually starts or after a meeting. These less transactional things, I think, are important and help with innovation and creativity for sure. So a good balance is important. In terms of academia and practice working together, is probably independent of in which space it takes place. Again, personal interaction is always helpful and helps with building relationships, which sometimes gives us shortcuts in terms of thinking, in terms of access, in terms of I have a quick question or how can we solve this? I think for these big questions, right, that we have in front of us, whether they are social, climate change plays a key role in this, but also do we say this globalization and things like that? I think cooperation is inevitable. I think I don't like to see it as two separate worlds. Yeah. I think both benefit from constant exchange. Now, I rather see it as a spiral than going back and forth. And you mentioned public-private partnerships. I think that's being one critical element, will be one critical element in addressing challenges from climate change, because that challenges some part of the insurance business model and the statistical underpinnings.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at sort of the maybe future of the space as you sort of are educating the generation that will inherit this industry in many ways. Are you looking at things like the most important things being things like climate change or things like the impact of technology? Obviously, to some degree, both. But like, what is the area that's getting like more of a pull, or the students are more curious about or thinking about more actively?
I think climate change is something that's around for long, particularly if you had some connections in the insurance industry. You know the statistics, you know the thinking about it, and the insurance industry is a recipient of that risk as well as at the core of driving to kind of address it. So that is always something that students find interesting and feel that they could have impact. It also moves into the area of sustainability and ESG, even though I know the term can be politically loaded a bit, but I think it covers well the areas that are being looked at. Technology plays a massive role in insurance, as you know. I think insurance is mainly about information exchange and data, always has been. And for that, I think the insurance industry isn't really good in dealing with it. AI will do a lot. Of course, it can be a risk, but I see it more as an opportunity to automate and also to help focusing on complex tasks, which really needs humans on it. I mean, we're talking about the war for talent since I joined the industry. I think it starts manifesting properly now, and therefore automation, digitalization, and AI can have a positive impact if done properly with the ethics and the sustainable kind of use of it in mind.
Nice. And I guess one thing I was curious about with your experience having worked in different countries and also explored academic institutions in different countries, do you find that institutions are able to collaborate cross-language easily in research, or do you end up with pockets where there's some really great people in Germany doing something that they'd have to translate for the people in Italy to get the gist of, and likewise in France and in the UK? How good are we as an industry at sharing our research cross-border?
There's a risk, of course, that certain things of expertise are remaining in cultural or language pockets.
Yeah.
Most of research is done in English, though. And funnily, the academic community is kind of global and also quite dispersed, but again, not super large, which I also experience in insurance. Kind of, you think it's a massive global industry, one of the largest institutional investors, but in the end, it's still quite intimate sometimes.
Yeah.
What was the question?
Yeah, just I guess how good are we? It sounds like the fact that we do lots of things in English probably helps for knowledge sharing. But
it does. But of course, particularly when you have maybe local research institutes or universities working together with, let's say, their closest insurance companies or practice, things might be developed in these areas which do not are not disseminated quickly.
Yeah.
But this is something that we do see in education and research a lot, also taking care of that there is best practice and that there's expertise everywhere, whether this is Asia, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, that are areas that are often overlooked.
Yeah. Perhaps we obsess over the London market a bit here and maybe don't look.
Yes, I mean, it's somewhat centralized through, I think, 3 main markets, I suppose. And it's probably something that we can do better as well, to be a bit more open and diverse and maybe proactively in looking what's happening. Because we know that, for example, the African market or emerging and developing countries have been a driving force as well in insurtech and technology, right? Because the fundamentals there to do insurance in the traditional way haven't just been present. So it needed innovation and some creative thinking to kind of deliver insurance in in those markets.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads me to the other question I was sort of wrestling with is you mentioned earlier the sort of challenges and the importance of data at like the core of what this industry delivers. What are the things that you're seeing around like data challenges that the industry has sort of across the board that prevents it from maybe being able to deliver on its promises or introducing new products? Where do you see the challenges that the industry is wrestling with from that perspective?
I think for the large carriers, it's legacy and systems. I mean, that is a challenge we as researchers encounter a lot. After mergers, before mergers, through mergers, most of the large carriers are somewhat a conglomerate of different kind of companies historically, and it was always a very hard thing to integrate systems and data. So I think, again, some excellence is lost in, let's say, the frictions of systems. And this is why we do see disruptors are very often non-traditional or even non-insurance companies or people, because they don't have this legacy. They don't have the problem of there might be something there and there might be something there, but we don't know how these systems might talk to each other.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge. Again, it needs investment, I suppose. It needs some will, I guess, as well. But how do you rebuild a house while you still live in it? Right? Yeah. That's always the challenge the incumbents have.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because you mentioned as well, like the reinsurance space, the alternative risk transfer space, but like it's so important to know like what the risk you're looking at is. And if we, as you said, these companies have sort of merged together, which sort of convolutes what is in these sort of books of business. So as you try to go up the chain and have innovation there, you're oftentimes trapped going, well, if we don't understand what we're working with, in the same way as we don't understand like the age of a driver, it's hard to give them car insurance or all these types of things. So it becomes a central point to even letting this industry have an opportunity.
We don't want to have a modern London market spiral again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but with everything, data is at the heart of pricing, of underwriting, of figuring out what a risk actually is. And of course, we have to categorize scenarios. And as you said, car insurance is always a very good example also to use for teaching for insurance, even though that will be changing dramatically when we think about automated driving and all this, which might come in the future. But I mean, if we distinguish between good and bad risks, we often have taken gender as a proxy, right? Saying we knew that women on average are better drivers than men. It doesn't mean that I'm a better driver than you, right? But maybe I am. So on a general level versus the individual level is always something to look at, right? And this is what it makes with kind of evolving and emerging risks, also in relationship with climate change, makes it so difficult because suddenly everything is equally risky and we don't get diversification effects anymore.
Yeah, that's super fascinating because you have the like general alignment of trends, right? It's not to say any one at an individual level it feels unfair, but at an industry-wide level where we can say, well, people who have bad credit scores tend to be higher risk just because the numbers in aggregate have presented that. So as we get more and more sources of data, you'll be able to potentially fine-tune better the number of factors instead of it being like the top 5 things that generally trend towards risk or being risk averse or risk taking. You'll sort of have a wider pool of data points that you can sort of apply, saying, okay, we run this across 100 different elements of this risk, and now we have a sense of what we think the risk actually looks like.
I totally agree, and I think there are no excuses anymore to take, for example, gender as a proxy for categorizing risk, because there must be better ones. Yeah. And if an insurer isn't able to find them, then they haven't looked hard enough, right?
No, completely. And do you, when you obviously look at the theoretical side with your students and then you usher them off into the real world of practice, do you stay in touch with them and do you hear their stories? What kind of things do they come back to you and say once they go out into the real world or the practice version, I guess?
I mean, it's fascinating for me to observe because they will get around the globe, all over the place. We must have hundreds, if not thousands, of alumni from that program now that will sit in nearly any country in the world in all kinds of levels and areas of the industry that you can imagine. I mean, it's quite natural, of course, that those who are in London or in the UK or in Europe, it's easiest to stay in touch with personally. But modern technology and social media, of course, have made that much easier as well. We are also intensifying our alumni relationships currently. And of course, I like to see this as a revolving door, right? Once they graduate and get out, we want them to come back as alumni and help kind of educating the next generation and also showcasing them as role models and what you can achieve in the industry, and also giving it the human element, right? We're kind of a very friendly industry, and I think we're quite welcoming to kind of quirky characters. I think we need them, definitely.
This industry is certainly not short of quirky characters at certain levels.
No, and I think we should showcase them more to kind of make sure it can attract more talent. I think we need more talent. And we need, definitely more quirky characters to help kind of rethink some of the things which feel like we've always done them like this.
Yeah. Given the global nature of the industry, do you do partnerships with other universities, either in Asia or in the United States or elsewhere in Europe, or do most of the major insurance programs sort of operate in on their own or in silos?
We do have loose connections with other universities, also with other researchers around the globe. We do have some formal relationships at university or business school level with other universities. In some areas, we do double or triple degrees, so where students would study at several institutions and then each of them would award a degree.
Oh, that's cool.
So these are areas we do collaborate a lot with industry around the globe, with different players. Of course, it's always easier to get people through the door who are in London. Luckily, that's an international market as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've even bumped into some former students from Hanover here in London, which is quite nice. And so we try to kind of connect on all levels, whether that is more practice or whether that is more education or theory.
And for you personally, I guess, looking forwards, are there any topics that you're really keen to dive into, do more research on, maybe have a book come out one day, or do a sabbatical on, or something? Anything that's like, one day I really want to dive into X?
Yeah, I deeply care about the potential that the industry has to drive, and now you can probably make up your own mind about what that could be, to drive sustainability. I think it hasn't done a good job so far, even though it sits like the spider in the net in all the connections with industry, with organizations. And so the lever of kind of motivating businesses or organizations to also up the game in terms of sustainability, green agenda, green transition, other criteria, such as, and you name it, child labor, forced displacement, and all these things, CO2, net zero. It has a unique position because in the end, every business, every enterprise, every company, large or small, will buy insurance. And there again, with the help of governments, regulators, but also, I suppose, supranatural organizations. WTO, EU, I don't know, the United Nations with the principles of sustainable insurance have tried to kind of push this on for the pursuit of the sustainable development goals. I think there's much more that can be done. And I hope I'll be able to support that from the kind of research end and education.
Yeah, well, and this industry has a good track record for doing these things, like from the institution of like fire departments and having a role in like the electrical grid as that was beginning to ensure safety. So so we've done this before, and I think we're well positioned. And there's some things we've seen now, like using insurance to help unlock financing for ESG projects and these types of things. So there's a lot of really, really cool things happening. I think it should be more on the radar of the industry to like lean into that, like lean into what we can do to sort of like unlock where things sort of get stuck in the existing process. So
totally agree.
Hopefully we lean into that historical position we've always held.
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Simone, having you on the show. Hopefully people can reach out to you if they want to learn more about what you do at Bayes Business School and perhaps to assist you with your own research one day if that...
That would be amazing. And it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Reinsurance Podcast. If you enjoyed our show, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review to let us know how we're doing, preferably 5 stars. For more insights and updates, follow us on LinkedIn and visit our website at supercede.com/podcasts.